Okay, so this is one of the toughest questions I've ever asked anybody. One of my favorite readings of yours is your essay "Eddies in the Stream," and if some of you viewers haven't read that, just type it into Google "Eddies in the Stream," um, which is one of the most lucid and articulate descriptions of enlightenment I've ever encountered. Seriously, Rick. In this essay, you delineate a nibbonic state of infinite possibility that occurs neurologically, physically, and by physically I mean quantum, in terms of quantum physics, and spiritually. You call this state, quote, abiding in the stream, unquote. I was wondering if you could describe what abiding in the stream would look and feel like on a daily basis, or, I mean, we're talking a lot about kids in the previous questions. How would you tell an 8-year-old boy what abiding in the stream is and why he would want to do that?
You warned me, Koza, that this was going to be some kind of like major curveball. Um, well, I'm not sure I would try to talk with an 8-year-old about abiding in the stream. I would probably be more focused on, just kind of lightening up and relaxing and, appreciating the goodness inside himself, which is what I'd say to an 8-year-old girl, and also looking for opportunities to grow. I think maybe if I could digress slightly, to use the metaphor of Ender, for those who know that book, one thing that struck me reading the novel, and I've reread it multiple times, referred people to it. I don't know anybody who felt that the novel was, not deeply powerful. One thing about Ender is he's always looking for ways to learn and grow. He's always trying to develop and, in general, in my language, cultivate inner strengths of various kinds. And I think that's a fundamental question for people. How focused is a person on their own learning process as they go through each day or each minute or each hour? They say in Tibet that if you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves. So in the most important minute of your life, which is always the next minute, right? Because it's the one we can actually do something with. In that most important minute of your life, are you looking for opportunities to let good learning land and to consolidate and stabilize your growth that's not yet fully consolidated, and look for new things that you could learn from and grow from? And in life, sometimes the range of opportunity is down here low in terms of what I could actually learn from this moment. Other times, the range of opportunity is higher, right? But in that range, there's that fundamental increment, that delta. Are you at the high end or the low end of the range of your learning from this minute of your life, or this day, this week, this tough quarter at work, this issue in your family, and so forth? And I think that's a fundamental distinction for people, how motivated they are to look for opportunities to learn. And then in particular, this is where it's the X factor that comes in, learning how to learn, right? That's the magic bullet. As we learn better and better how to help our brain learn the good lessons in life, because we've got a brain that's biased, as you know, toward over-learning from the bad lessons of life. As we get more and more competent at, skillful at, again, a general value, but one that often, as a generalization, does speak to men, certainly, competency and mastery and skillfulness. How do we get more skillful at helping our brain learn and grow in the good ways, right? And I think what is true for me is that at a fairly early age, I realized that even though my life kind of sucked in a lot of ways, it wasn't horrible, but it was really pretty unhappy for a variety of reasons, including my own self-generated neurotic take on things as a kid and a teenager and even a young adult. But anyway, the key in a lot of ways to life is looking for opportunities to learn. So that's what I would really, really say to that 8-year-old. I'd say, hey, whatever's happened in the past, you can't do anything about, and you can't do anything about this exact moment of experience. But going forward, you can really set your future self up, the guy or gal you're going to be in 1 minute or 1 day, 1 week, 1 year, 1 lifetime. You can really set that person up in a sweet place, kind of giving to them, paying forward. I think that's, in a lot of ways, we haven't talked about this, self-compassion, where you wish that your future self not suffer, and you wish that your future self be happy, right? So you want to kind of pay it forward, except you're paying it forward in this example I'm giving to the one being that you have the most power over and therefore the highest duty to, which is to say your future self. By setting that person up, through your learning today, you set that person up that will be you tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So
That's
that's
that's a great um, that's great advice for an 8-year-old. And I want to bring it back to something you mentioned earlier. You have the opportunity to start filling that backpack, right?
yeah,
Like to start putting good things in that backpack for the journey that's ahead, and to be the better
yeah.
hiker or the better walker. Yeah, that's great.
That's great. So now if I could, I'll not duck your question. To do this, people need to be a little patient with me, and I'll walk through it briskly, okay? So think about two separate processes. The flow of the mind, and bringing it down to real, nothing metaphysical here or mystical. We hear things, we see things, we think things, we feel things, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the mind. And also, separately, think about physical reality, materiality, which includes, since E equals mc squared, energy woven together with mass. Okay, that's materiality. So, in effect, we have two domains. We have materiality, which is tangible, measurable. You can touch it, you can weigh it, you can look at it with a microscope. And then we have intangible, immaterial mentality, the flow of subjective experience. Okay, so in this sense, Descartes was right. There is a categorical distinction, obviously, between, for example, the material marks on a page or the material sound waves moving through air and the immaterial meanings that those marks on a page or sound waves through air represent. Okay? All right. So this is so far a very standard view, kind of a way of thinking about things, but you go, oh, okay, that's how it is. And we're surrounded with examples of physical stuff, materiality, and yet immaterial information that materiality of one form or another represents. Okay. Now, in the mind, so I want to talk about the mind for a moment. There may be transcendental X factors. Personally, I think there are, woven into the nature of things. But separate from what that possibility might be, and it's perfectly fine to just think, no, atheist, nothing outside the naturalist frame. And the naturalist frame, let's be clear, includes all kinds of wacky stuff. Quarks, dark energy, the Big Bang itself, quantum entanglement, just all kinds of crazy stuff. But we're still inside the natural frame. There's no resort to a supernatural explanation, right? Okay. Inside the natural frame, any sound we hear, any sight we see, any thought we think must be based on underlying material, biological, neurological processing and structures, right? Otherwise, we're left with a supernatural or transcendental explanation. So inside the natural frame, every thought right now, people hearing the sounds of these words, the sounds are translating into meaning, people are thinking about the meanings, simultaneously they're aware of other sensations in the body, probably other sounds in the room, mind wanders, which is natural, we think about other things. All of that is based on underlying physical processes. Okay. What are those physical processes? They're not deeply understood, but the gross outlines are pretty clear. For us to have the conscious experience of a sound or a sight or a feeling or a hope or a sorrow, the entirety of the contents of consciousness, and to have awareness itself, right? But to have any content in consciousness, any particular sound, any particular taste, any particular emotion, what have you. What happens is that a coalition of synapses comes together, these little connections, tiny connections between neurons. To scale it, we have roughly 100 billion neurons in our brain, roughly 5,000 connections each on average, some more, some less, giving us a network in the brain of roughly 500 trillion synapses. It's that complicated. It's really quite extraordinary, all right? So to form a coalition of synapses in the neural substrates of conscious experience might involve tens of billions, hundreds of billions, even trillions potentially of synapses that come together. They form a pattern like an eddy in a stream. A momentary pattern occurs of various synapses forming a coalition in which they synchronize, they fire together, and somehow, in ways that remain mysterious still, that coalition represents the conscious experience of a sound, a sight, a taste, a touch, a smell. All right? So you see how this is happening? So at the moment, in our mentality, our subjective experience, a thought has come together, and it feels a little bit like an eddy forming, a swirling pattern in a river, in a stream, and then it stabilizes. We're having that thought, and then it disperses, and we have the next thought. Similarly, corresponding to that mental experience, a physical process has occurred in which an underlying coalition of synapses is formed that is the basis for that mental experience. That coalition persists, and then as that coalition disperses, as that eddy disperses, that pattern of synapses disperses, so too does the mental experience of that particular thought. Okay? Well, for the nervous system to be able to represent any new thought, it must have excess capacity. In other words, it must have neurons and synapses that are firing away, but in the moment, it's only fertile noise. It's just noise. They're not representing anything yet. They're waiting to form some kind of meaningful pattern that's orderly, that's a reduction of uncertainty. Noise equals uncertainty. In information theory, a signal equals a reduction of uncertainty, a forming of a pattern. Entropy decreases as patterns emerge, right? And then entropy increases as the neural substrates of a particular thought or feeling go back into pure noise. Okay. So that means, therefore, that at any moment in time, there are neural capacities that in that moment are effectively unconditioned in terms of representing any particular conditioned pattern of content in consciousness, any particular sound, feeling, and so forth. Now, obviously, the nervous system broadly is conditioned by evolution, by physical processes, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of its capacity to represent a meaning, a particular thought, a particular idea, a particular instruction, a particular intention, a particular sensation, its capacity to represent that meaning is effectively unconditioned, much as a chalkboard, as it were, or a whiteboard, is in effect unconditioned when it's blank because it can represent anything. Okay, so far? All right. Now, let's think about material reality, right? I'm not a physicist. These are, to me, plausible notions. People can think about them. There's certainly no, what I'm saying I think is fundamentally plausible, and it's the kind of thing that is really at the reaches, really, of physics. But that said, think about every moment of now. What is now? There's this extraordinary mystery that's under our nose all the time. What is now? And no scientist knows what now actually is. It's really unclear what time is, and it's unclear how this moment of now, which is temporally, not spatially, but time-wise, temporally infinitely thin, this moment of now, somehow, in terms of, like a waterfall, right? Or the cascade of neural processes inside a person's brain. This moment of now somehow can hold all of reality and all the causes of the next moment of now, even as this moment of now is vanishing and disappearing right under our feet. It's quite extraordinary. So imagine the emergent edge of now. And imagine if we could take this slice of time that is now and really, really make it super thin, but then kind of blow it up so we could look closely at it, kind of freeze it and look closely at it. In material reality, at the emergent edge of now, we have quantum particles, right? They're not even particles, they're quanta. They're the building blocks of particles. It's described as a kind of foam, this quantum foam at the emergent edge of now. And at the emergent edge of now, we have quantum potentiality, which hasn't yet congealed into actuality. So at the emergent edge of now, in materiality, in physical, energetic reality, we have an analog to what's happening in the brain at the emergent edge of any thought or sound or sight or emotion or intention, what have you. Just before that eddy of thought congeals into some kind of pattern and gets conditioned, before that happens, there's effective unconditionality at the emergent edge of now in terms of the mind. In the same way, analogously, there is quantum potentiality at the emergent edge of now in physical reality, in material reality. So we're starting to see an analog in the deep nature of things between mind and materiality, all right? So my notion is, I ask myself, working backwards with reverse engineering, what's going on in the brain of a saint or a Buddha? What's going on in the brain of someone, if we just separate out the transcendental for the moment, but what's going on in the brain of someone who seems utterly peaceful, utterly free, utterly happy and wise, who describes, when they look back on their life, someone who seems utterly sane, incredibly rational, very effective with others, a kind of charisma just radiates off of them. And when they describe their own life journey, they say that enlightenment basically is the best, coolest thing there is. Not because they're attached to it. And sometimes the way people talk about this is that when you get enlightened, you discover what was always already true, but was obscured by ignorance. So that said, there's clearly a change. There's a movement along a path whereby we suddenly discover what was always wonderfully true in any case. So these enlightened beings, they exist. And there are people who also exist who are very far along. They're maybe not quite all the way yet, but they're getting very, very, very close. And for me, that seems like the upper possibility in human potential, and one that's available for just about everybody. It's not available to me to, run around like Colin Kaepernick, let's say, of the San Francisco 49ers, or to play, music like Yo-Yo Ma. I mean, I don't have that kind of talent. But I think more generally, most people, especially if they work at it, can really go a long way in the upper reaches of human potential. So to me, it seems like a worthy aspiration. So it becomes appropriate then to do the reverse engineering and ask yourself, what in the heck is going on in the brain of that person, the brain of a Buddha, in a sense? Now, my own notion is this, to kind of wrap it up here. I suspect that when people do deep meditative practice and quiet their mind enough, there's a very psychologically languaged description that's a kind of roadmap in Buddhism that I think about as a guide to us, as accurate in terms of what needs to happen inside a person's own psychology. In other words, let's take them at their word. So kind of, again, doing this quickly, one of the major roadmaps is that a person should steady the mind internally, quiet it, and bring it to singleness. Singleness being a state of great integration of awareness. Not yet awakening, but very, very fundamental. And already, this kind of steadiness of mind and quiet and singleness is a non-ordinary state of awareness, right? But it does correspond to various underlying neural factors that one can plausibly strengthen and help oneself increasingly over time stabilize. As I have a fair amount of my own life practice, and I have teachers who are further along than I am in this process. We can steady the mind, we can quiet it, we can bring it to singleness. And then we start moving into this roadmap given in Buddhism. And I don't think it's the only roadmap to awakening, but I think it's a very psychologically clear one, especially the first 4 steps of the 8 steps of this roadmap. The first 4 steps move through the jhanas, these non-ordinary states that are summarized in the right concentration or wise concentration element of the Noble Eightfold Path. And in these jhana states, the mind gets quieter and quieter, and increasingly signals start dropping out. In other words, the eddies that support various thoughts or feelings start dispersing increasingly into fertile noise. There is less and less awareness of the body. Their awareness of the environment starts dropping out. The thought just goes away. Verbal thought tends to go away, or it gets extraordinarily quiet. There's not any kind of straining or stressing or problem solving. Certainly craving, gross forms of craving certainly fall away. There's happiness, there's bliss, but as you move through the 4 jhanas, even bliss falls away. There's just a deep sense of tranquility and inner peace. You can see that this is a description of the various eddies of consciousness increasingly falling away. And so that all we're left with in the mind-brain system is fertile noise. That's effectively unconditioned. And then if you move into the 4 formless jhanas that follow the 4 form jhanas, you move through, these are more mystically described, but I'll just say them to you. You move through the base of infinite space, infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, and then whatever that is, and then fourth, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And then the description is you go into a state of cessation. And for me, it's plausible to imagine, because people who are engaging in enlightenment inside the natural frame, they're changing their brains as they move toward nirvana, or as is traditionally called, nibbana. 2 words that mean the same thing, nirvana and nibbana. Okay, I suspect that these descriptions are accurate, and that what they're talking about is a gradual falling away of any particular patterns in consciousness. So increasingly, we're more and more present with fertile noise that's effectively unconditioned at the emergent edge of now in terms of the mind-brain stream. And then when we go into cessation, I've never experienced this. I'm just surmising, you know what I mean? I'm trying to plausibly operationalize in neuropsychological terms that seem plausible to me what could possibly be happening. Because then, for me, it becomes practically useful to cultivate the various factors that, to me, are plausibly involved in the movement toward nirvana and nibbana. Well, I think what could be happening plausibly is that as a person develops an extraordinarily quiet mind and then tips into cessation, that final step, it's, you could say, the 9th step, if you will, after the 4, after the 8 jhanas, you tip into cessation. And then in the Buddhist description, as you know, you tip into nirvana and nibbana, which is described, it's basically described as indescribable. You're outside the normal frame of anything that can have language. And yet it seems real. People do experience this, if you can even use the word experience, and they come back and they're changed, often changed irrevocably and profoundly. Minimally, it was an extraordinary awakening that they go back to again and again in their life. Maximally, they're completely awakened, and it's an irrevocable process. Well, my hunch is that people, when they go through cessation, all the signals drop out. You're left with nothing but fertile noise, right? It's effectively unconditioned. And in that state, there's a profound freedom. One of the things that repeatedly strikes me about people who are enlightened or very close to it is they describe an extraordinary freedom. They're in the world, but they're not of the world. They're not trapped by the world. They're engaged, they feel pain, they have toothaches, they deal with them, they manage their monastery, their organization, they engage in peace work, what have you, but they're not ever caught by anything that arises in the mind. As the Buddha put it, nothing ever invades the mind and remains. Nothing, there's a freedom in their core. My hunch is that, among other things, Nibbana is a radical intuition of unconditionality. Because the conditioned eddies of thought and feeling, sensation, perception, what have you, they've ceased. they've completely fallen away. And so I think a person at that point has a radical intuition of unconditionality and an intuition into the nature of unconditionality at the emergent edge of now in materiality as well. Because the two are analogous. At the emergent edge of now, materiality is effectively unconditioned. At the emergent edge of thought, mentality is effectively unconditioned. I think that's why people who are very awakened, they seem to have a different view of reality altogether, not just thoughts and feelings, but the nature of reality. It's if they've, as Aldous Huxley put it, they've gone through the doors of perception, that painting a lot of people have seen or drawing, I think from the Middle Ages, where a man is shown poking his head through this big sphere of the cosmos, seeing ultimate reality on the other side. And so I have a hunch that's what really happens in nirvana. And then when people come back, they have this radically irrevocable intuition about the common ground, the common nature of both materiality and mentality as emergent, constantly changing, constantly vanishing, and yet at its core, looking at my cat here, at its core, fundamentally unconditioned. And then if you want the icing on this cake here, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle was that consciousness and observation, so I'm going to let my cat out, consciousness is necessary to turn quantum potentiality into actuality. In other words, to actually stabilize the momentum or location of a particle. It's not just that we know about it, but that the momentum or the position becomes stable when we make the observation. Or particles that are entangled in some way, faster than the speed of light, observing one, in other words, bringing consciousness to one, establishes the nature of the other one that's entangled with it, right? Well, what if Heisenberg was right in a profoundly deep way? What if consciousness, in some sense of that word, is necessary for quantum potentiality to congeal into patterns of quantum actuality at the emergent edge of now? That would plausibly imply the necessity for some kind of consciousness to be woven into the nature of reality at its emergent edge so that reality can actually congeal into actuality. And that, of course, is another word for God, very broadly defined, not necessarily the Abrahamic personality that you find in the Judeo-Christian and Islamic teachings and scriptures, more consciousness woven into the ground of things, which, who knows, people might have some intuition of as well when all the signals drop out and they're left only with fertile noise, awash in unconditionality at the emergent edge of now in an extraordinarily non-ordinary state of consciousness being nirvana.
Wow.
All right. I hope that wasn't too much.
No. I want to say something.
Actually, can I just add to that? So,
yeah.
What's the practical takeaway? I think the practical takeaway is to be more aware of now, and to, much as I'll never climb like Chris Sharma, but I can watch what he does, and I can internalize some of that, and if I was really serious about training as a climber, I could get close to his level, not super close because I'm too old for that at this point, but, I could go further along by my analogy here in terms of the upper reaches of human potential by understanding what this process might plausibly be, or what might actually plausibly be the nature of the mind-brain system in someone who's fully awakened. We can study and channel, in effect. I use that term loosely, not supernaturally. We can, in effect, study or channel what these beings are doing who are really far along. So, for example, we can bring a lot of awareness to this moment, to now, right? And we can start trying to have a growing sense of the ways in which, in this moment, it's always passing away, and yet it's always emerging. Mm-hmm. And we can start having a sense, maybe an intuition, of a kind of freedom at the emergent edge of now in our own experience, in our own day-to-day activities. And that sense of freedom, that felt sense in the body. It starts as a concept, which is okay. That's a way to start. We need a map, but we got to walk the ground ourselves, right?
Yeah.
You cannot eat a menu. The menu
Yeah.
is your guide to the meal. You need to eat the meal, right?
Yeah.
So we can use, but we want to come down into an experience of this sort of freedom almost at the emergent edge of now. And we can deepen in that felt sense and apply it increasingly to that gap we've been talking about between the feeling tone or hedonic tone of experience as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and then how we respond to it. We can also have more of a sense of interconnectedness with everything, because again, the more people who really describe awakening, they feel opened out into allness in a radical way, because everything's connected to everything else. Yeah,
Rick, I just want to mention, like, I'm so glad you brought in the the nature of God, like this conception of God, because I think that edge you're talking about, or abiding in the stream, or that fertile noise, I think it's been described in history as Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, or godliness that we all share, that we all have access to, right? Like that we can get to that, get very close to that and feel that connectedness, and I think that's brilliant. I wanted to say one thing. I wanted to say that, like, compassion, cultivating compassion, enlightenment, like this higher stage of enlightenment, quantum physics, and neuroscience are all at the infancy level, right? Like, we're just taking our first steps into this much larger universe. And I think what you're talking about here, people 50, I don't know, years later, hopefully this will still be up on YouTube, they will come back and look at this, and this is a great map. And one of the best things I heard is the time you want to have a map is before you go into the forest.
yeah,
You don't want to get the map when you're already in the forest, right?
that's
So
right.
you want to have the map before you're in the forest. So I think of this as a map for upcoming generations, to reach that higher consciousness, to reach that, and it's just going to develop more as neuroscience develops, as quantum physics develops. So I know for a lot of viewers, this is gonna seem like really technical and really kind of out there. I suggest go read "Abiding in the Stream," the essay, and just keep your mind open to it, because and come back and watch this again as neuroscience and quantum physics and higher consciousness develops, and as we progress further.
Yeah, and if I could add, Kozo, briefly, I think it's really okay for people to consider this in an utterly agnostic, if not even atheistic frame. There's the guts of what I was saying there in terms of the common nature of mentality and materiality as emergent, transient, interdependently arising, and comprised of many parts, right? And at its emergent edge, effectively unconditioned. So there's a kind of inherent freedom of sorts before things congeal into actuality. There need be no resort to anything transcendental in grasping all that. I just think it's quite profound to contemplate on the implications of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that consciousness is necessary for quantum potentiality to congeal into actuality. And I think that has some far-reaching implications. But for me, the takeaway is, we should wrap up probably pretty soon, but I think the takeaway is to, relax and allow your own mind stream to run. Don't take it too seriously. It's produced endlessly by these very arbitrary, ancient processes that reach back 600 million years to the beginning of the evolution of the nervous system, let alone another almost 3 billion years to the emergence of life on this planet altogether. And just kind of reclaim yourself, allow all the eddies to be streaming along in your consciousness rather than suppressing some of them, reclaim them, and really be engaged in what's your relationship to the contents of your own consciousness. Is there a sense of allowing it, letting it flow? Is there a sense of disidentification from it, a kind of stepping back from it and not taking it so seriously? Is there a sense of disenchantment from it, kind of waking up from the spell, being less the puppet who is manipulated and controlled by the various forces around you? Is there a reclaiming of your own autonomy and freedom and self-reliance from the inside out? You know, is there a desire to help yourself grow through both compassion for yourself as well as a tough-minded understanding of the strengths that we all need to develop inside, you know, to make our way in this life and to succeed and to be accomplished in this life? Is there a focus on learning as you go through your life? And hopefully there is. You know, and then last, I think, is there a humility that lets you appreciate mystery? To appreciate that even in the field of science, you know, it's interesting that 96% of the universe was unknown 40, 50 years ago. In other words, dark matter and dark energy. 2/3 of the universe was unknown 20 years ago, before dark energy was really discovered. I mean, there's so many wild and crazy things just inside the natural frame, let alone, who knows, what might be outside the naturalist frame. So I think that sense of modesty and humility is both a scientific virtue and a human virtue as well.
Wow, that's a great way to conclude, Rick. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, there is so much in this interview. There's so much wisdom. There's so much research, and so much, not just wisdom and research, but so many like helpful tips that I think people can use to improve their lives. And I'm just so happy that I was able to tap your brain for all that. So
Oh,
thank you so
great.
much.
Really nice collaboration here. Great
Yeah,
to hang with you. Nice to
yeah.
talk with you.
All
Yeah.
right. So for those of you who wanna find out more about Rick Hanson, I suggest Hardwiring Happiness. Get that first. Read that book because that will change your life immediately. Buddha's Brain's a great book. And then there's one other book that I kind of like every once in a while just flip open randomly. It's called Just One Thing. And then also Rick has a newsletter that that's called Just One Thing, that if you subscribe to his list, you can go to rickhanson
Net.
dot com or dot org.
Net.
Oh,
Rick
sorry, dot
Hanson,
net.
SON.net.
Dot net. Yeah, you can subscribe to his newsletter, and he'll send you weekly just little excerpts of how you can improve your life. So check him out. Thank you, Rick, and
Thank you, Koza.
have a great day.
Great.